episode 181 of Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry. Joining me, Barry, today is, I originally planned on it being Bull Nakano Day, but besides Bull Nakano, and we're going to be looking at one of her matches, a great match from the past. Barry, how cool is it? We are joined by a wrestling legend, a tag team legend, Jumpin' Jim Brunzell, going to be joining us, former high flyer, former Killer Bee, and as you point out during the interview, former one half of the Central States, this is most important, tag team belts with Mike George, Barry.
Yeah, they didn't have a nickname. We can give them a nickname, but they didn't have one. We didn't, I got to tell you too, as Jeff said, so this is no secret. We just recorded it with Jim Brunzell, and it's Jeff, I'm going to go on a limb. This might be my favorite interview of all time.
Not the first time you said that, but I think
no.
I'm going to go on a limb just for time considerations and say perhaps you may, depending on Lou's editing skills, you may only hear part one of the interview tonight, but definitely part two. We also want to mention that we reached out to friends of the show, friends of the Facebook group Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry, and let them ask Jim a few questions. This is the kind of thing that we'd like to feature on our Patreon page, which is coming.
It's coming.
I mentioned, by the way, Barry, 1,822 members of our Facebook group, kicking ass, taking names, all you other Arcadian groups, just go ahead and suck it because you're looking at our tail feathers. Anyway.
You know what the problem is, Jeff? Those other shows, they all stick to wrestling.
Hold on. Check. Got that reference out of the way.
Got it.
So anyway, Barry, before we go to the interview with the jumping one, Jim Brunzell, let's talk about why we originally came here today, Bull Nakano Day, the legendary Bull. And we're going to look at her match from November 14th, 1990, inside the steel cage as she takes on Aja Kong. Holy shit, Barry, there is a lot going on here. And by the way, let me just say, for those of you that watched the Britt Baker Thunder Rosa match on AEW, this is similar in style to that match, except accelerated by tenfold and with a finish that will have you jumping out of the proverbial fucking chair. Barry, am I wrong?
Jeff, you are 100% correct.
Check. Okay, we got those two things out of the way. Now, Barry, tell us what you thought about the match.
So I love the match too. So the big difference, look, I'm not getting TNT currently since I made the move because I cut the cord and I chose not to pick up that package, but I did find the match on YouTube or a link someone had sent me. And I got to tell you that Thunder Rosa Britt Baker match is very good. The difference here is there is something culturally that was taking place with the Japanese women. And this was, I remember Meltzer writing in the 80s or early 90s how this was the hottest promotion in the world. And he was right, because you had believable matchups. You had people that were going to get into a cage that you truly felt hated each other. They weren't acting for the cameras. You really felt they hated each other. But more importantly, everybody watching, everybody in the arena truly believed that these two women hated each other. And this match it's really a microcosm of exactly what was taking place between these two women. And I think it's fantastic. To add to it, they both have their respective camps, and their respective camps are, somehow getting involved. They don't go overboard with getting involved, which is great, but they're involved to some degree. So I love this match. First off, this is what a grudge match should be. They do beat the crap out of each other. You and I were talking off air about this match, and there's a point which you brought up the hangman's noose, and somebody brings in like an electrical appliance and she's just wailing. Bull is just wailing Aja Kong over the head. But this match is made by the finish. And spoiler alert, if you don't want to hear about it, mute yourself for 20 seconds or mute us for 20 seconds and
come back.
But please come back, because best interview of all time coming up with Jumping Jim Brunzell. But Bull Nakano goes to the top of the cage, and this isn't a cage where the top of the cage is flush with the top rope. This is a cage that I would say it's a 15 or 20 foot cage, right, Jeff?
Yeah, it's not your grandfather's cage. This is
it's a real steel cage.
Yeah, this is a real cage, and it's like high as fuck. That's all.
It's high as fuck. And so she goes up. Bull Nakano goes to the top of the cage. She stands on top of the cage and then jumps off and delivers, for lack of a better term, the Hogan leg drop. So in your head, picture the Hogan leg drop 20 feet up in the air on somebody's neck and chest. What makes it more incredible is the second she hits it, she bounces up and starts to climb out of the cage. So I don't know how she does that. You know, any of us would have probably laid there for a minute trying to get ourselves and our balance and collect our thoughts. Her ass hits the mat. She bounces up and starts to climb out of the cage. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything ever like that. And to add to this match, Jeff, the after interviews between both women, and then I guess what are their seconds, right? That would have to be their seconds. Who was Aja Kong's second with the wild?
Oh, that's a perfectly reasonable question. I wrote it down. I don't have it with me now, but yeah, there. I know Medusa Michelli is there, and this is as great as I've ever seen Medusa Michelli. Just like, you know, and that's not a knock on her, but she's fantastic outside the ring, brawling with the other camp. She's jumping up on the side of the cage, trying to get in. She's getting whacked and falling down off the top of the cage down to the floor. She's fucking fantastic. And let me just say, Barry talked about the move that Bull does, hits the leg drop, bounces up. Barry, that transition in that move is smoother than any transition you've ever heard here on Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry. Boom.
We are underplaying how fucking amazing that transition was. I'm not quite sure I have ever seen anything ever like that. I don't know how she did that, Jeff. I don't know how she didn't kill Aja Kong. And Aja Kong, she plays it. I mean, she sells this thing for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So just incredible. But this is one of these matches. Go out of your way. It's 32 minutes from start to finish, which is great because you get the interviews before the match, you get the interviews after the match, and obviously the match. But go out of your way, dedicate the 32 minutes for this. Watch this. You will not be disappointed.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, you know, when Barry says, think of the Hogan leg drop, it never, ever would Hogan hit a leg drop like this. I mean, it's just so beyond any leg drop that I'm trying to even think who hit a leg drop like this. Like I can't even think. But I will say the trust involved with Aja laying there on the mat as this woman goes to the top of the cage and hits her with those, by the way, can I just say, spectacular thighs of Bull Nakano. And I had to put that in there for Vandal Drummond. And she hits her, but the fact that Aja lays there, they have so much trust as she hits her with this leg drop and then bounces up. It's absolutely fucking amazing. And, it's wow. Just, and with all the other shit that's going on outside the ring, I will admit, maybe this isn't a 5-star in the ring spectacular, but when you combine the interviews before the match, the interviews after the match, all the shit. And Barry, here's the word. I think the second time we've used this, the Michigas going on outside the ring with Medusa Michelli, with all the rest of the girls that are getting into it. They're throwing chains inside the ring. They're throwing over the top of the cage. They're throwing the hangman's fucking noose. When I saw that, I go, they're throwing a fucking hangman's noose, of course, the trash cans, the toasters, everything you'd ever want to fucking see in a grudge match is in this fucking match. And when you combine all that, in my opinion, holy shit, Barry, what a fucking amazing match. And you know what's really interesting? You know, when I go and look back sometimes for historical context, and I'll Google the match. And so there is a website, I believe it's called Cage Match or something like that. And they have a group of people that will they'll review a match, and they grade it 1 to 10. And so on this particular match, the grade was like 8.94, something like that. And I was like, really? And I looked, and there were like, let's just say for the sake of argument, 35 people that had graded this match. Okay. There were like something along the lines of 27 or 28 that gave it a 10 stars. Okay. Just absolutely legendary match. Then there was like about 3 or 4 that gave it a 9-star. And then there was like maybe one or two that gave it 8 stars. Then there's one fucker that gave this match 4 stars out of 10. And I'm like, what fucking match was this guy watching? Because this is absolutely fucking amazing. So I will post a link to this match on our website, our Facebook group, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry. And as Barry said, I will hope you go out of your way to check it out. The 30 minutes, as Barry said, does include the introductions with the interviews, the walk up to the ring, then the exit. There's a bunch of shit that happens after the match where, the shoving and the shouting in the microphone. Do I understand what they were saying? Hell no. But, it's still a great match. The outfit that Bull wears, and I'm not sure if Brian Last, our executive producer, will include this particular photo or not, but she is wearing this thing, and you know what it reminded me of, Barry? Do you remember that scene, Barry, in Jurassic Park when Newman from Seinfeld, Wayne Knight, is out there in the car, and he crashes his car trying to get away from the camp and get all the money, and he runs into that creature, and he says, "Oh, hello, nice little creature," and then the thing all of a sudden has this hood that comes up, and it attacks Wayne Knight. Do you remember that scene in the movie?
Yes, I absolutely remember that scene.
Yeah, and the outfit that Bull is wearing looks like the hood that creature popped up before it attacked Wayne Knight. I don't know. It's fucking awesome. That's just what it struck me as. I go figure. So anyway, now, Barry, before we continue, you and I have pushed it. We've talked about it. This is an amazing, amazing interview with Jim Brunzell. Could not have been a nicer guy. We are so appreciative of Jim for his time. And we hope that you, the listeners of Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry, will enjoy this interview that we did with Jim as much as we did interviewing him. So, Blue, why don't you take it to our interview with Jim Brunzell? Barry, how cool is it that we are joined by one half of the former High Flyers, one half of the Killer Bees. It's Jumpin' Jim Brunzell joining us here today on Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry. Jim, shout out to you. How you doing today, my man?
I'm doing very good. Thanks for having me on.
Barry,
I'm an old relic,
How cool is it to have one half of the High Flyers with us?
Yeah, well, so here's the thing. You got to remember, too, Jim Brunzell was part of 3 great tag teams. Obviously, the High Flyers, the Killer Bees, which went national in the WWF. But going back to his early days, he was partners with the guy that I actually always felt was really underrated, which was Mike George. But, Jeff, I got to tell you, I don't know if they actually had a name for their team.
That was in the Central States?
Yes.
That was the, I believe you'll agree, that was the highest paying territory that you were ever in, correct?
I used to wrestle 3 times a night for $25.67.
Oh, those early days of your career. So anyway, Jim, we are going to be very happy to talk with you today about your career. So, like we always say, why don't we start at the beginning? Of course, everyone knows you trained at Vern's school along with Flair and I believe Patera, the Iron Sheik. So why don't we start off? You got to have some stories from training at Vern's school. It was like minus 40 degrees and he had you out in the barn. Tell us some stories about those days.
Well, none of us knew what we were getting ourselves into. We had an idea, but it was 6 days a week and it was 4 to 6 hours a day. And Billy Robinson, who was a British heavyweight champion, more or less trained us. And, we'd start out with calisthenics. And one of his big deal was Hindu squats, which is a free squat. And we started out doing, sets of 25. And at the end, we were doing 1,000 free squats a day. 10 sets of 100. And my legs, I used to do, squats and all sorts of stuff, for jumping and football and everything. And my legs were the biggest they've ever been by doing them damn squats. And, Billy used to do submission holds and throws and everything. And then after about 2.5 hours, Vern would come in and then he'd beat the hell out of us, on the mat. So, this went on and on and on. And they really didn't, more or less smarten us up until, 2 or 3 days before our first match. So, everybody was wondering what the hell's going on. And, Vern was real strict about, wrestling and what he had, what his philosophy was. And it was a great philosophy because he was very, very successful, multimillionaire, and he had such a great crew here in the AWA when we started, and I think, out of that group, outside of Bob Bruggers, who was a hell of a football player at the University of Minnesota and also a great basketball player in Minnesota high school, he got in that plane crash with Ric Flair, and he broke his back and never wrestled again. So outside of that, you got Cosro, Ken, myself, and Greg, and the Nature Boy. We had a hell of a camp that year.
Yeah, Bob is, and I don't know if you know, Bob is slowed down a lot in recent years, but it was working as a bartender at a place in Fort Lauderdale. Jeff and I are both from the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, South Florida. So Bob is still down there, and his nickname, Jeff, if I'm correct, they call him Gucci. And I'm not sure why they call him Gucci, but he looks to be doing well. So you just mentioned Billy Robinson, and anybody who ever listens to our podcast knows that I am the biggest Billy Robinson mark on the planet. He spent about a year working Florida in 1976, and I was just blown away by his style of wrestling. But I have heard stories that as a teacher and as a trainer, he could be just brutal on trainees. Would that be true?
Yeah, he had sort of a sadistic side to him, and nobody knew more about submissions than him, and he went to that old Wigan camp in England where there was a guy, Carl Gotch was there, and then there was a guy named Billy Riley who was the head guy, yeah. But, they all, took real pride in being able to, grab any part of your body and have you, wet your pants. So he really didn't teach us that much, but he was brilliant in the ring. I remember I had a couple 30-minute draws with him, and I mean, I didn't know how I got into these holds that I had on him. He just was. He was a master, and he was. I went to Japan with him a couple times too, and that's where he really was in his heyday, and I know he and Nuki had some great matches, and I hated to see Billy at the end because he never took care of himself, and he had some pretty bad injuries, and his hand was all crippled up, and he had horrible knees, and I know the last I heard he was down in Tennessee, and he was working with kids that were going to go to Japan. So, and then I know he passed away, several years ago, but he was a incredible worker, for his own style.
So let me ask you, I kind of jumped ahead there when I was talking about you going to the camp. I know that you had played some football when you were in school. How did you first hear about Vern's school? I mean, did someone ask you to go there? Did you look into it yourself? How did that all start?
Well, when I was a freshman walk-on at the University of Minnesota,
Go Gophers!
Yeah, go Gophers! And Murray Warmath was a coach, and he had a couple of great teams back in '60 and '61 and '62, and then almost all the kids in high school wanted to go to Minnesota, and Greg Gagne, Vern's son, was a walk-on too. So Greg was a quarterback, and I was a wide receiver. So that's where I got to know the Gagnes, and Greg and I hit it off real well. And a good guy, and actually Greg was a damn good quarterback. He was just 170 pounds, is a little too small to play running quarterback at the University of Minnesota, because a lot of the plays were geared for their quarterback to option and then also to carry the ball. And Murray Warmath was a firm believer, like all those coaches were in the 60s, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, field position, and the team that makes the fewer mistakes usually wins. So Greg and I became friends, and then Greg invited me over to his house, and Vern had a palatial mansion on Lake Minnetonka, which is the big lake in the southern suburbs of Minneapolis, and I remember the first time he had me over there was Viking coaching staff, and Vernon hired this what they call a galloping gourmet who was a chef, and his name was Hank Meadows. So I looked at this. He had a huge broiler and grill, and they must have had 40 of these little filet mignons, cooking. And Vern says, Jim, help yourself, have as many as you want. And wow. I had about 3 or 4 of those, and they were about 4 or 5 ounce fillets, and they were done perfect. And, I thought, geez. So right away, I saw how Vern lived, and, he was the exception. But at that time, I got to know him, and that my opinion changed a little bit, when I worked for him, because he was pretty damn hard to work for in terms of, it was all him. It was all his way or nothing. So, and, they had made me partners with Greg when I came back from Japan and in late 74. And that was the beginning of the high flyers. And, we had, like I said so many times, the talent in the AWA was just incredible. And everybody wanted to go to the AWA because you only worked 14 to 16 times a month, and then you had time off in the summer, whereas when I went to, when it was down in Kansas City, you worked 7 days a week, 2 to 3 times a night. You never had a day off. And then when I went to Mid-Atlantic, in Charlotte in 1979, you wrestled every day too, and then sometimes twice on Saturday and Sunday. So, it was ideal here in Minnesota. I hated to leave Minnesota when I went to New York, but I'm sort of skipping ahead now. But that was in 85. But Minneapolis was just an incredible place, and they had so many great guys: Nick Bockwinkel, Bobby Heenan, Billy Superstar Graham, Wahoo McDaniel, Mad Dog Vachon, The Crusher, Bobby Duncombe, Jack Lanza. There was such great talent here that, and there was only like 14 guys, and everybody knew their position, and everybody, he made good money, and you had time off, which was ideal in this business.
Yeah, it's one thing, and I've got a copy of your book, which is True Stories from the Wrestling Road Matlands by Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. I picked this up from you, and this was the nicest thing ever, Jim. I picked this up from you 6 years ago, actually. It was March of 2015, and I know that because you actually inscribed it to my son. It says, Zach, all the best for nothing but good health, prosperity, study hard, and play harder. Enjoy my stories. Peace, Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. And it was March of 16. But you said a couple of things. You actually said a lot that I wanted to touch on. One was any listener to our podcast, and Jim, I don't know if you know, we are a Peabody award-winning podcast.
Multiple Peabody awards.
Multiple Peabody awards. Oh, absolutely. It's yeah. But 2 things. You mentioned the Minnesota Vikings, which I think Jeff is going to want to talk to you off air for about 6 hours. Because possibly the biggest Viking fan that's never lived in Minnesota ever in the history of the world.
Never been there. Never
been to Minnesota. And my hobby, Jim, is food. You're talking about filet mignons and take as many as you want. And I'm sitting over here and my mouth is watering. But I know we've got you for a limited time. You are coming courtesy of our old friend Nick Massey, who does Captain's Corner Happy Hour and has a Captain's Corner Happy Hour with you, Jim Brunzell, coming up 7 p.m. Friday, April the 2nd. Very exciting. Nick is a tremendous human being. We have had many conversations with Nick, and we've interviewed, plenty of the guys that he's worked with. Just, I think the world of Nick. I know Jeff does as well. But you are going to have, I guess, trunks. You're going to auction off some of your trunks. There's a rumor that you may have masks as well. Will you have copies of your book as well during that auction?
Yeah, I think Nick wanted me to bring 15 or 20 of them. I think I have that. So I'll bring them. The book was, and a lot of guys write books, but a lot of guys use ghostwriters, and I collected these stories for 5 years, and my wife had the manuscript and she printed it all up, and I had all my own personal photos, and it was just it was really a sort of a work of love, because I wanted to tell the people in a way what it was like to be on the road, because people have no idea what it was like to be a pro wrestler, especially in the early days. And they watch TV and they say, okay, yeah, they're making TV and they're talking about their opponent this, and then they're going to wrestle their opponent in Minneapolis or St. Paul, and then they really didn't know that we did interviews for 20 towns. So that same match might have happened in Denver, Chicago, Milwaukee, Green Bay, Winnipeg. Where the hell else did we go? Went to Quad Cities, and then then you'd have spot shows in between. So it was but again, I want to go back to Minnesota in terms of the best working conditions that I was able to do in my early years at pro wrestling. And it was such a change going to New York, because, Vince, he had 60 guys and he had, 3 towns a night. And I remember for 3.5 years, Brian and I actually averaged 27 days a month. That's how many days we were on the road. And we went 52 or 54 days in a row. And Greg Valentine broke my hand in Rockford, Illinois, and I had to go home, and they had to let it sit for 1 day so the swelling went down. They put a cast on. And then in the next 3 weeks, I won more matches clotheslining people with that mask than I ever did with any drop kicks.
So, well, Jim, one of the things that we did from our Facebook group, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry, is I reached out to a couple of people that are very active in our group, and I said, I'm going to give you the chance, if you would like to ask the great Jim Brunzell some questions, those of you that were fans of his back in the day. So I'm going to read you a couple questions, and if you could answer them for us, we'd certainly appreciate it. The first one comes from our old friend, Chris. By the way, Barry, his name is pronounced Chris Zauta. We've been getting it wrong for 180 episodes.
What, Chris Zauta?
Yes, it is pronounced Zauta. So that's what I had an inside source tell me. Chris never bothered to tell us. Anyway, Jim, Chris wanted to know. He said he remembers some matches that you had against Nick Bockwinkel in the early 80s, was very appreciative of your matches with Nick. Of course, Nick, one of the all-time legends in business. And Chris wanted to know, any thought given to you perhaps having a run with the belt, whether it be short-term, long-term, anything like that?
Never in the AWA. Yeah. That would have been, they had plans for me with Greg, and that's as far as it went. I had, Nick, I consider Nick Bockwinkel, God rest his soul, to be one of the greatest, the top 5 of any of the guys I ever worked with. I mean, it was a fight for your life, but we worked our rear ends off. And I remember I had a match with him, and I think it was 1975, and it was an hour draw in St. Paul, and it was by far the best match I ever had. And then we had an incredible match in Winnipeg that was an hour long. And then I think we had another hour in Denver, but it was just, Nick was, his timing and everything he did in the ring meant something. And he'd build a story, and he'd stop me. And it was just a real work of art, being in the ring with him. And he was a wonderful guy. And the thing that complimented him was Bobby Heenan, who I consider the greatest all-around talent of my era, because he could do anything. I mean, he could go in the ring and work, and he could talk, and he was incredible, and Vince, worked Bobby to death. I remember sometimes Bobby'd go out, in a match, 3 or 4 different guys, during the course of an evening, and then we had TV 2 days in a row, and it was 8 hours a day. And then we flew up to Canada, another 6 hours up there, and, countless interviews. And Bobby was just, the best.
Well, let me ask you a question. This might seem like a ridiculous question, but do you think in some ways that Nick is underrated historically by fans? And almost like, do you think, as great as he was, and I'm certainly not trying to minimize it at all, because Barry and I definitely realized how great he was, do you think he was underappreciated by Vern?
No, I think Vern really was fortunate to have him here, because he realized Nick was exactly the type of heel that he wanted, a wrestling heel, and who, along with Bobby, did great interviews, and who could work with him in all over the different cities in the AWA. He could work with Billy Robinson. I mean, and he had a couple matches with the Crusher, which were, and Nick could work anyway in the ring. But I mean, that was, Vern loved the wrestling heel. He just loved the wrestling heel, because, they used to have incredible matches. And I remember this was towards the end of my career, and I want to say it was in the late 80s. We were down in Atlanta for some pay-per-view, and Nick Bockwinkel worked against Dory Funk, and I think they had a 30-minute draw, and it stole the show. It was by far the best match of the night. It was incredible. It was really something. Geez. And I was in a 6-man tag, and I think it was Wahoo, myself, and I can't remember who it was, but we were against Morocco and Dick Murdoch and somebody else. And I remember the very first deal that happened, I had a headlock on Murdoch, and he threw me and dropped down. And then as I came off the rope, he drop kicked me, and he says, "Hey kid, I can drop kick too." And I don't know if you knew who Dick Murdoch was, but he he was crazy, but he was so gifted in the ring. God, he was good in the ring. Him and Dusty Rhodes were just incredible, when they were together. Oh boy.
Yeah, we always talk about Dick Murdoch as a Hall of Fame wrestler, and sadly, I think the last place he worked would have been Smoky Mountain, somewhere around probably the mid '90s, somewhere right around there, maybe the early '90s. But what a talent he was! Another guy that was a real talent. And Jeff, how was that for a segue?
Boy, you're the king of segues, Bear.
Well, maybe the prince, Jeff. I consider you the king of segues, so I'll be the prince, the crown prince. But another guy that I always felt was a hell of a talent, really maybe never got the push he deserved in any territory, was Jeff Ports. And I know that Jeff is a guy that you know extremely well, that you worked with. But there's a great story out there about you and Jeff Ports on a commercial flight from Minneapolis to Chicago. Would you mind sharing that story? Okay.
Well, we did TV, and then we were flying. We had like a 5:00 flight from Minneapolis to Chicago. It's only 45 minutes, and then we were going to go to the amphitheater. So Jeff and I were traveling together, and he was just a wonderful guy and a multi-talented guy. He was a tough guy too. I mean, he could. So we're sitting on the plane, and there was a kid, and the plane must have been, it must have come from California before, because there was a kid that was sort of, he was drunk, he was inebriated, and he was sitting right behind us, and he was giving the stewardess a hard time because she refused to serve him any more, liquor, and he was, calling her this and that, and finally I turned around and I said to him, I said, "Hey," I said, "knock it off." And he says, "F you." And Jeff Ports was sitting right next to me. He unbuckled his seatbelt, and he looked back at the kid, and the kid tried to get up, and Jeff headbutted him in the nose, and he headbutted him so hard the kid hit the back of his seat, and the blood flew out. It hit Jeff, but it almost hit me, and the kid was knocked semi-unconscious. Meanwhile, the stewardesses were going absolutely crazy because, we're 30-some thousand feet, and here's this kid, his nose was completely smashed, and Jeff says, Jeff wanted to beat the shit out of him, and thank God. I said, "Oh God, Jeff, please," and then the captain says, he gets on the horn and he says, "Okay," he says, "who's ever fighting on the back of the plane, stop. Otherwise," he says, "we're going to have the police waiting our arrival." So Jeff sat back, and I sat back, and the kid had this huge towel over his head, and he kept yelling. He says, "I don't know what hit me. I don't know. He didn't punch me. I have no idea." But the towel was completely red. So the plane landed, and these cops come on, and we walk off the plane, and the stewardess said, "This gentleman here, helped us, and I'm glad he did." And so the cops didn't do nothing to us, but they put the handcuffs on this kid and pulled him away. But I mean, to see this on an airline, that was full at 30-some thousand feet, it just, it took me by surprise too. I thought, well, this kid, he's drunk and whatever, but Jeff just said, "Oh, wham!" And boy, that headbutt, and the Englishmen were known for headbutting. I mean, and that is just a heck of an offensive weapon, because if you hit somebody in the snoot or in the mouth with your forehead, and you know how it is, just to bump heads accidentally, it stuns you. Well, if this guy, is actually geared up, and cranks his head, this kid just, I mean, if you could have seen it slow motion, you would have seen this kid. The kid was lucky he didn't get a concussion.
I can just imagine as
the cops, he deserved it.
As the cops are coming on the plane,
every bit of it.
The steward is saying, "Yes, officer, the kid with no nose. That's the one we need to
right. The kid's nose is shoved down his anus at this point.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But so we went to Chicago, and nothing ever, happened. They didn't arrest Jeff or anything or question us, but that was just something that happened. It was just out of the ordinary. But
so okay, Jim, our next question is going to come from Barry. It's your old friend Joe Stassi. Loves to talk food with Barry, Jim.
Yes.
But Joe asking, Jim, what were your thoughts about working with the late Bruiser Brody? He's always heard that Frank could work a little stiff. Did you enjoy working with him or not?
Well, Frank was a great guy, and I'll relate a story to you. I had worked with him, and he'd come into Minneapolis, and I had been kicked in the groin, and I had a vasectomy about 6 months earlier. And what had happened was, when I got kicked, it ruptured these stainless steel sutures that were inside. I had like a blood clot in there. So
I'm crossing my leg.
I may have to put down the headset.
Well, it was painful too. It was painful. So Vern says, "Well, we'll take advantage of this, and we'll bring Brody in and have him jump off the top rope onto you, and then you'll be out." So I was out like 4 or 5 weeks, and they brought Frank and I back, and we brought back to Denver. And what had happened there before, when Frank was working with somebody, as he was walking to the ring, security wasn't very good, and this guy had jabbed him with something, and Frank turned around and flattened the guy, and this guy pressed charges, and there was a lawsuit, and Vern didn't back him up, so the next time we got into Colorado, I was supposed to be mad at him because, here he had, laid me up and jumped on my belly and da. So I go into the ring with him and he wouldn't tie up with me, and he wouldn't, he went underneath the rope. I said, Jesus Christ. So during the match, I was, vehemently mad at him. So I went and all of a sudden he jumped out of the ring. He went to the locker room. So Jesus Christ. So Jesus God, so I go into the locker room. I says, Frank, I says, God damn it. I says, come on, you got to go in the ring. And he says, no. He says, just forget it. He says, it has nothing to do with you. This is for Vern, for not backing me. So that was it. He got counted out. And I thought, the fact was here, everybody was waiting for this return match, although I did have some good matches with him. And I told him, we had a match in St. Paul, and I told him before the match, I says, Frank, I says, now remember, I said, this is my hometown. I said, don't kill me in my hometown. and we had a great match. And I think, Frank did incredibly well in Japan. He was a talented guy. Good, he played football with the Washington Redskins. And this is the honest gospel truth. Shortly, 2 days before he was murdered in Puerto Rico, he was in the Kansas City airport, and I was there too, and we had breakfast together. And I said, he asked me, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to Texas. And he says, I said, where are you going? He says, well, I got unfinished business in Puerto Rico. He said, the promotion there is trying to screw me. So, and then 2 days later, I find out, he was murdered in the shower. And I thought, my God, and it was a tragedy. And, to this day, they never did prosecute, what's his name, Gonzalez. And there was a couple guys who were in the locker room who I won't mention that knew, exactly what happened. And they didn't speak up, and they were threatened too. They said if they had, said anything about what transpired, that they would be, hunted down and killed. So I think after that, I don't think very many guys went down to Puerto Rico to work.
Yeah, one of the things too that I really liked about your book, you had talked a little bit earlier about the camaraderie of the AWA guys, and there are so many photos in your book. Again, the book, True Stories from the Wrestling Road, Matt Lands by Jumpin' Jim Brunzell. But there are so many photos of you with guys that you were working with, and it's baby faces, it's heels, it's everybody. But you do get this impression that possibly because it was a smaller territory, as far as the amount of talent there, that everybody seemed extremely close. But during your time in the Mid-Atlantic area, you got to work with a guy that I consider a legend, which was the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers. And there was a match, you and Ricky Steamboat, and that's a hell of a team right there, wrestling against Jimmy Snuka and Buddy Rogers. That's amazing. What really stands out about that match for you and being able to work with Buddy, who obviously, I was going to say on the tail end of his career, but, exactly. Realistically, he had been retired for a decade even prior to that, except for a couple of months in Florida. So what was it like getting in the ring with somebody like that?
Well, first of all, you got to realize that George Scott was the booker, and George Scott idolized Buddy Rogers. That was his big hero at, the 50s. He was incredible. Well, so Buddy Rogers came there, and, everybody had heard of him, in different territories, manipulating himself, to get the heat and everything. So, he was sort of managing Jimmy Snuka, another brilliant worker, God rest his soul. So we had this match, and, Buddy Rogers used to do a tanning bed. He had his own tanning bed. and he'd get it on under this tanning bed. He was all brown all year long, and also during the course of interviews and when he'd go to and from the match, he'd wear bandages, these big, Band-Aids over his ears, so he could, block out the noise from the people booing him. So he's in the ring, and it's my turn to make a comeback. So he's in the ring, and he's cowering in the corner, and so he's got the bandages on his ears, and I pulled one bandage off, and he sold it like son of a gun. And then I pulled another bandage off his ear, and he sold it like son of a gun. And then, he had this big bandage over his chest. And little did I know that he had burned himself, and he had blistered his chest with the sun lamp. So I jerked this Band-Aid off his chest, and he yanked it off, and he let off with a scream. And as I bailed him out of the corner, he said to me, he says, "I bet if you had a few more seconds," he said, "you'd take my boots off." And I never worked with him again.
That was
yeah.
Go figure, right? So
yeah. Well, he was the. Okay, go ahead.
No, please continue.
Well, he used to have this big diamond ring, and he'd do these interviews, and Flair was there, and he called himself the Nature Boy and everything, and he'd look at this ring, and he'd twirl it around on his finger, and he'd look at the crowd, and he'd say, he says, "There's only one diamond in this business," and he says, "Ric Flair, isn't it?" That's what he'd say,
That's funny. So, well, listen, I want to go back to our questions, and we're going to go off the wrestling topic. Son of Minnesota, Glenn Braggett. Apparently, he may know a thing or two about you, Jim. And Jim, he kind of, Barry, I don't know if you're going to like this, he broke kayfabe on us. Oh, what? Yes, He told us that perhaps Jim, a fan of a certain son of New Jersey. So yes. Glenn wanted me to ask you, Jim, give us your top 5 Bruce Springsteen songs.
Oh, man.
Putting you on the spot.
The first song I ever heard of Bruce was Jungle Land. And that's one that it was about 6-7 minutes long, and I was coming back from a airport, a small airplane ride, and I listened to it, and I thought, Jesus Christ, it went on and on and on. It was sort of like an opera. And I couldn't figure out, and they never mentioned the damn singer. So a couple days later, I told my wife, I said, "God, I heard this damn song on the way home, and I don't know who it was." And then I heard, Born to Run, and then I thought, geez, I'm gonna get this record. And then I listened to the record, and then I got every record that the other two, his first records, Greetings and. The other one, so I became enthralled with Bruce Springsteen, and he's just incredible. And I got to meet him too. I got to meet him in '84, and I've probably seen Bruce, my wife and I, and some other people. And Mary and I have seen him about 80 times.
Wow! I guess you are a fan, huh?
Since 1978, and actually I sent him the book because I have a chapter in there about him, the Magic Rat, and it was just something about him resonated with me, and once I saw him and saw how hard he worked, in these 3-hour shows, it was just incredible. So, I just, I was very fortunate. And then a friend of mine who was actually, his name was Terry McGovern, another guy who passed away, was Bruce's right-hand man for 23 years. Wow. And he was a wrestling fan. So there was my big in. So I remember when this happened. I can't remember what year it was, but I think it had to be in the early 90s they brought us out to New York for some big signing, and Terry McGovern wanted to go. So I says, well, come on, and I'll get you a ticket. So he sat with Brian and I up at our table, and all the other guys were there, and so they asked me, people said, well, who's the guy with you? And Terry says, I'm the security for the Killer Bees. So it was fun, and he really made it so much easier, because trying to meet somebody like Bruce Springsteen is pretty damn hard, and there's 20,000 people who want to meet him every night. Sure. And he's been very good, to me and my family, my wife, who he likes a lot more than me. I get jealous of her because he kisses her. And I remember the last time I saw him, I think it was 2016. I gave him a big hug, and he looked at me like, "Hey, easy," But yeah, he's.
Well, let me ask you.
I can't say enough good about him.
You saw like 80 of his shows. Which venue do you remember seeing him at that you enjoyed his show the most? Combination, great show, great venue.
Well, twice. I saw him in Chicago at it was called the Uptown Theater in '78. And I was guest of this Andy Frayne security. So we go there, and I have my wife, and I have a dear friend who's a photographer. His name was Mike Gratchner, wonderful photographer, and he has Mike. A number of pictures. Yep. Yeah, great guy, and just loved wrestling, and so he's with us too. And I go and I says, tickets for Jim Brunzell from Andy Frayne security, and they says, geez, there's no tickets here. And I said, you got to be kidding me. And they said, no. And I said, oh, God. I said, well, what? And they said, it's sold out. And I said, oh, shit. So they had a huddle, and then they said, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put you right down in the orchestra pit, right down from Bruce's microphone. So the three of us sat there for this 3-hour show, and he was 3 feet away from us. And that was an incredible show, because you watched him constantly, go back and forth and play the guitar incredibly. And then the other time we were guests of Terry, and we were at Miller Stadium in Milwaukee, and there was 65 or 67,000 people there. And Terry put us right on the stage, right behind the guitar tech. So it had like a little apron and a little housing. So we were right on the stage about 20 feet from Bruce during the whole show. And it was incredible to see that. And then actually to see the machinations of the concert, behind the scenes. They had behind the actual stage. The stage is just mammoth. They had like a little bar in the very back, and they had I don't know. They had place for press and everything, and then it was just unique that we had the opportunity to be in be at the concert, let alone right on stage with them. So it was great.
Yeah, let me tell you. So I met Bruce Springsteen once, and I got to tell you, of all the celebrities I met, oh, absolutely, we're good friends now. It's like, oh yeah, he sees me, he's like, yeah, we'll go get a beer, right? So I was working, Jeff, you will like the beginning of this at least. I was working at a restaurant in New York City, and this was
a manager.
Yeah, I was a manager, and it was 1998. I had been married, I think, for 2 or 3 months, and I should say, my wife, when she was a kid, her idol was Bruce Springsteen. She wanted to be Bruce Springsteen. She had a red bandana she would wear. She knew every word to every song and every meaning of every lyric. So she literally lived and breathed Bruce Springsteen. We're married for 2 months. I look out the window. It's this quiet night on the street. It's summer. And here comes Bruce Springsteen walking with his wife, and nobody's bothering him. So who's the asshole who's going to go bother him? This guy. I grab a menu, I hightail it and run outside, and I'm like, Mr. Springsteen, I'm dog just pulled off my my microphone and my headset. So
we are nothing if not professional.
Dog decided to sit on me and just rip everything off. So I run out there and I'm like, Mr. Springsteen, and I'm blathering like an idiot. And I'm explaining to him about my wife, and God bless him, he and his wife stood there and listened to every word that I was saying. I'm sure I was making no sense, and then signed the nicest autograph for my wife. And I just thought that was just the nicest thing that anybody could have ever done. But what a guy. And speaking of autographs, again, the Prince of Segways, Jeff.
There you go.
Yep. There you go. Coming up Friday, April the 2nd, 7 p.m. It is Captain's Corner Happy Hour with Jim Brunzell. This is obviously a virtual autograph signing, but Nick has done probably 100 of these in the last year. I tune in whenever I can because I just think everybody has so much fun. But what I think is cool, again, in reading your book, True Stories from the Wrestling Road, Matt Lands, you are also an autograph collector, Mr. Brunzell.
Well, I had 2 or 3 autographs that stand out. One was Joe Namath, and of course I have several from Bruce. And then I had, as a young kid, I was a Yankee fan in the late 50s, and there was a pitcher by the name of Bob Turley who pitched for the Yankees, and I sent him a letter, and he sent me a doggone, a little postcard of him, and that was one. And then Ted Koppel, who I spent about an hour and a half with at one of those West Orient travel, clubs, and he was flying. I can't remember. He was going to Washington, and I was going to Buffalo, New York, and we're in Chicago, and they had horrible weather. So we're in this doggone room for an hour and a half, and I walked in there, and it was just he and I. So I walked up to him, and I said, "Geez," I said, "Mr. Koppel, my name is Jim Brunzell." I said, "I'm a big fan of Nightline. And I just want to tell you, what a wonderful job." And he just sit down. So we sat and talked about everything from the Kennedy assassination to pro wrestling. And then he signed an autograph for me, and I stuck it in my jacket and didn't think anything of it. And then when I got to Buffalo, I took it out and I looked, and I thought, Jesus Christ, I wonder which way I'm supposed to hold this paper so I can read it, because it was you couldn't read it. It looked like hand scratching. So, that was, I thought, and it was funny because about a week or 2 weeks later, he had a amateur wrestler on talking about pro wrestling and sort of, knocking it a little bit. And I thought, So it was sort of fun, sitting there talking with him, and, luck be it. And, we traveled every day, and we took airplanes every day. So there was an opportunity that we were, going to meet people. And this is the honest to gospel truth. In Winnipeg, I didn't put this, I don't know if I put this in my book, but I don't think so. So in Winnipeg, we stayed downtown, and we would wrestle, and then we'd go to a place called High Steakoff, which was, there was about 3 or 4 of them in Canada, and they were spectacular, just incredible steakhouse. So we eat, and I get back, take a cab, boom, I'm going up to my room, and I get in the elevator and go up one floor, and all of a sudden this gentleman comes in, and I look at him, and it's Harry Chapin.
Oh.
And I look at him, and I said to him, I said, "You're Harry Chapin." He said, "Yeah." He says, "I'm playing tomorrow night in Winnipeg." So, and then God Almighty, it was shortly thereafter he got killed. But I just, it was just dawned on me that, all of a sudden you walk, the elevator opens and the guy stands there, walks in, and you think, holy cripe, So I've been fortunate, and what can you say?
All right, as a Vikings fan, I'm just for my own personal self. Tell me which Vikings autograph you have that you value the most.
Oh God, I've got one from Fran Tarkington.
Nice.
And I'll tell you this. I wanted to have a tryout with the Vikings, and at that time, their head scout was a tight end who used to play with the Vikings. His name was Jerry Reichow, and he told me, he called me back and he says, Jim, he says, here's the deal. He said, the chances of you making the Vikings are slim to none. And he says, we hate to cut University of Minnesota football players. So that was it with the Vikings. But I had a dear friend, Jeff Wright, who played.
Oh, yeah. Number 23. Number 23.
Yep. Yeah. And he was a great athlete. He and I played at the University of Minnesota together. And I knew a lot of guys that played, with the Vikings. And I had, Jimmy Carter, who I played football with. He took Ray Nitschke's job at Green Bay, and he played with the Packers for 8 years. So, and I knew a lot of guys that, that went to the Vikings, and I suffered through 4 Super Bowl losses.
You and me both, brother.
I'll tell you this. We had parties then. And by halftime, you couldn't drink enough to bury your sorrows because the game was over at halftime. Every single game, I thought, my God.
I was 14 and 15, and I would have joined you in those drinking parties.
Oh, God. We used to have parties, 40 people, and then pretty soon everybody says, well, should we turn the damn game off now and just, get into the kegs?
Yeah, that's funny. Well, let me go back to that's okay. Let me go back to the questions. Next question is from a veteran wrestling promoter Howard T. Brody, who wants to know, when you were a member of the High Flyers with Greg, which team during your AWA run that you two worked with did you consider a veritable night off? In other words, the other team's so good you considered it a night off.
Probably Bockwinkel and Stevens. Incredible. I mean, Jesse and Adrian were good, but it was, Adrian was a hell of a bump guy, and he made that team. And Jesse was very good on the mic, and they complemented each other very well, the East-West connection. But, Greg and I had some matches. We had a hell of a draw with Rick Martel and Tito Santana.
We actually reviewed that match.
We reviewed that match. Yeah.
It was a tremendous match.
Yeah, and it was a great match. And honest to God, I mean, there was, like I said, so much talent there. But it was, and then when Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson were teamed up too, they were an incredible team. I remember Pat Patterson came running off the ropes real hard, and I nailed him right in the chin with a drop kick, and he hit his head on the mat real hard, and it knocked him silly. So he sort of rolled out of the ring, and he was on the floor, and they were counting him, and Ray Stevens thought, geez, they're going to count him out. So Ray went to throw him back in the ring, and Pat was still woozy on his feet. And when he threw him back into the ring, Pat's head went right into the side of the apron, and he went back down on the floor. And I thought they almost counted him out, and then finally they got him back in. But he was cross-eyed for about 3 minutes, and then finally Stevens got tagged back in. But yeah, they were a hell of a team too. There was a lot of good teams, but Nick and Ray were incredible. They were probably one of the best tag teams that were around at that time.
Yeah, and Jeff, so Jeff and I have been doing our podcast now, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry. We're about 3.5 years. We've never missed a show, which is pretty incredible, weekly. But we did one on tag team wrestling, and I think we had. Jeff, am I right? Didn't we have Stevens and Bockwinkel is like one of the top tag teams, if not the greatest tag team of all time?
Yeah, they were definitely in the mix. Did you ever, just curious, did you ever work with the team of Stevens and Patterson, or the other combination of Stevens and Bockwinkel? Like, did you have a particular favorite of those three guys?
Well, I think Nick and Ray Stevens were a little better than Pat and Stevens, because Pat was sort of a character, and he would work the crowd more, where Nick was so damn good in the ring, that and everything he did, told a story. And I'm not knocking Pat at all. There's another guy. I mean, so many, they're all gone now. I mean, I talked to Jim Raschke, the Baron, and he's 81. And I said, geez, Baron, I said, I haven't talked to you for a year. I just want to make sure you're okay, because you're one of the last of the Mohicans, out of that big group that they had. He says he's fine, so that's good. But I know I got off the beaten track of your question, but yeah, I think without a doubt, Bockwinkel and Stevens were probably the greatest tag team we worked with.
Okay,
gotcha. And one of the guys you mentioned too was Adrian Adonis, and Adrian and Jesse Ventura. But if I'm correct too, I believe I did read this in your book. Were you there the night that Dan Spivey and Adrian Adonis got into the dressing room brawl in Flint, Michigan?
Yep, I was. I went into the ring because that's when it first started, and it was a horrible night, and I felt bad for both of them, but I felt really bad for Adrian because he almost got killed. I mean, I never seen anybody get hit that hard. And what had happened, Danny was new. He came in and, big guy. And this is what Danny Spivey, one of the things that he is most proud of. And he was supposedly the only white pimp in Tampa, Florida.
I think he's got a plaque. Doesn't he have a plaque?
Right.
So, but I tell you what, he was a tough son of a gun, and he came in there, and Adrian would always sort of, try to, well, he wouldn't, but he'd take liberties with some guys, and he was rough, and he wound up putting the sleeper on Danny Spivey really hard. So Danny had warned him. He says, Adrian, please. He says, don't be rough with me. I'm going to come back on you. And sure enough, Flint, Michigan, he slapped the sleeper on him, and Spivey hit him with an elbow and got him to break the hold. And then he kicked him, boom, and he opened them up on the side of the eye. And then, I mean, Bob Orton and I ran to the ring and tried to talk Danny Spivey and just say, Danny, get out of here, come on. So they go to the ring, or they go to the locker room, and then Adrian comes in and says, hey, what's going on, da. And what he does was he went to leg dive Danny Spivey, and Danny Spivey came up with an uppercut and hit him right on the side of the cheek, and hit him so hard that it sounded like he collapsed his jaw. And Adrian went up in the air about 2 or 3 feet and landed flat. He was flat. His legs hit flat, and his arms hit flat, and his head hit flat. And when he looked up, I could see the bone sticking through his cheek,
Ooch.
His upper cheek, and he never was the same after that.
Wow.
He that was a severe concussion he had, and he just never got back. He gained so damn much weight, and it was bad. And then, shortly thereafter, I guess, he went to Japan and came back from Japan and then was working in Montreal, and they ran off the road and he got killed. And oh God, it was horrible. Matter of fact, they were some fellows from Toronto called me and wanted to know if I'd be interested in doing or being part of a documentary on him. And I said, yeah. I says, well, just keep me posted. And they never called back. But yeah, it was a shame, because something like that happens in the business. And I mean, it's horrifying because, guys are split, they've been on the road so long, and you don't know what's going on at home that bothers them, or, a lot of them, had substance abuse and I mean, if you work 27 days a month and you fly every day, that's going to affect you. Just like COVID has, being Groundhog Day every goddamn day of the, week always seems the same after a period of time. Mentally it takes its toll. Well, the same thing happens is when you're on the road. And if you don't have a strong family and a strong wife, it's going to present problems. And there was countless, couples that, endured a lot of anxiety and just stress on the road. I mean, it was just, it's not normal. And, people didn't realize that, we were wrestling. I remember the Sheik, Khosrow wrestled so many times, and he went home one time and he was gone for so long that his wife redid the house and he drove right by it. He didn't even recognize it. So, I mean, that was one of the big, letdowns as far as it was, at the WWE, because, when there was 26 territories, you could wrestle everywhere. Then when Vince, took all the talent, there was only a couple of places you could wrestle. One was Japan and one was the WWE. So you had to put up with all that. And then consequently, Vince wanted to change the whole, what everybody knew as professional wrestling in terms of building a match in the town, building to crescendo as either a king of the, or what, a fence match or cage match or whatever. He didn't do that. He would have Hulk Hogan in LA against somebody, and they do, $230,000 at the gate, and they wouldn't work a match to come back. They'd come back with somebody totally different that didn't mean anything. And that's was Vince's undertaking on what he was trying to do. He went against what all the wrestling promotions had done for years, and Vince got away with it because he had a TV that was second to none, and he had all the talent in the world. So, I'd asked George Scott, who was the booker there, who George Scott fired me down in Carolina, and then I eased the booker up in New York when I get there, and I thought, oh my God, and then I mean, you were booked, you just didn't dare ask for a time off. I mean, it was just unmerciful. But I mean, that's, if you wanted to wrestle, you had to go to WWE.
Okay, Jim, next question comes from our old friend Mark Small, who wants to know, in fact, were the Central States Tag Team belts the ugliest belts you ever wore as a title holder? There may be some sarcasm in that question.
Well, I mean, when you look at the promoters down there, it was Bob Geigel and Pat O'Connor. And and they...
Wait a minute, are you trying to intimate there may have been some cheapness there?
There was. There was a lot of cheapness. And consequently, I think that Reggie Parks made those belts, and they were probably made in, probably the early 60s, and they were sort of brassy, so you had to take some brass polish to make them shine a little bit. But, after being in the business only about 8 months and winding up, being a tag team champion, I was thrilled. And Mike George, I remember you saying, was underrated. And he was he was a big baby face, and he was a amateur wrestler, but he was very good in the ring. He had good psychology, good bumps and everything. And I think he made a decent living as a heel in Louisiana and Texas and Oklahoma, but he never really got a break. And I've tried to get a hold of him, but I have no idea. I think he's still in St. Joe. I heard that he was working at the track in Kansas City, and I think Geigel got him that job.
That's correct. Jim, I was actually in touch with him last year, and after this, I'll pass on his contact info to you. Absolutely.
Oh, fantastic! Because he was such a wonderful guy, and I was down there by myself, and I lived in a $145 efficiency apartment with a blow-up air mattress that I used for a bed. And I remember Bob Backlund came through town, and he says, "Can I stay with you, Jimmy?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "You don't mind sleeping on an air mattress?" And he says, "No." So I had an extra double air mattress, and I pumped it up, and we had some beers and everything, and had a chicken, and went to bed. And in the morning he got up, that air mattress had a hole in it, so he had a stiff neck from sleeping on the floor all night. And then he had to drive to Texas.
Oh, geez. So Mark also wanted me to ask you, who came up with the Killer Bees name?
Oh, geez. I really think it was Brian. Mainly because the Miami Dolphins had the Killer Bee
yes, that's
defensive
right.
backfield, and they had guys with bees in it. So Brunzell and Blair, it just seemed natural, and thank God for Lanny Poffo, because we were doing TV, I think, in Canada, and Lanny Poffo had two of these doggone black and yellow striped pants, tights, and we wound up wearing them, and that was the first time we were called the Killer Bees, and it worked out real good. And then actually when we did the mass, which was totally different, for a babyface team to use a heel gimmick, I mean, they could have gone anywhere with it. And I remember we beat the Hearts in Buffalo and on TV, and they got over those damn masks, got over, like a son of a gun. And then Vince just, to be honest with you, and I know Vince didn't like me at all, and the feelings were mutual, but and consequently, I just, he led us on, and we were a serviceable team, worked hard every single night, and had a lot of good matches there. But there was no reason why they couldn't have put the belts on us for a little bit, and then we could have lost the belts and made more of something to upcoming matches. And then it's a shame. I feel bad for Brian, because to be in the WWE Hall of Fame was very important to Brian, and it'd be important to me too. But it's the fact that they overlooked us, and all these years, and then they put guys in from Tennessee and Kentucky, and then people always ask us, how come the Killer Bees aren't in the WWE Hall of Fame? And I said, well, it's my fault, because I was sort of a locker room lawyer, and Vince never liked me, and that was it. So he sort of put up with me, but And I think that was more or less the problem that we had to, put up with, especially the last couple of years there. And then when Brian left after they weren't going to do anything with us, and I still needed to wrestle because I had a gym, I owned my own gym from 82 to 87. So I needed that wrestling income. And then, to have Vince, have me do jobs on TV, with various guys, it hurt my pride, but I realized, I had to do it. So, that's one thing that I was sad about. And at the same time, it just goes to show that, Vince was in control.
Yeah, so I know that we're starting to wind down, and we're so appreciative that you've taken the time to be with us today. I've got about 50 questions. I'm going to try to whittle this down. But a guy that we saw work in the territory of Florida, and Jim, surprised, you never worked a match in the state of Florida?
Never.
Yeah, I thought you did one, and I went back and I checked all the results, and I couldn't find a single one.
Well, I did with the WWE because we
Right.
used to work Miami and the Keys. I remember every time we go to the Keys, we get drug tested the next day. That was a huge cocaine inlet, in the Keys.
No.
Yes.
Rumor has it, yes.
Yeah. So I remember everybody who would wrestle in the Keys, was extra cautious because the next day, sure enough, they drug tested.
Yeah. Well,
was there a question there?
I did, yeah. So there is a question wrapped around that. A guy that we saw in 1976 for about 7 or 8 months was one of your old teammates, one of your old Gopher teammates, Jan Nelson. And Jan was one of these guys that good-looking guy, big, kind of looked like Magnum before there was a Magnum TA. Kind of had a Tom Selleck look going. Great shape. Didn't stick around Florida for too long, but he left, and then I heard he passed away. But it's a guy that you almost never hear anything about. It confirmed he did pass away, Jim?
Yeah, he died of an overdose after a Rolling Stones concert.
That's kind of what I heard.
And it was horrible. And Jan was an All-American football player in high school, and he was touted to be a starter, and he was a mean son of a gun. He and my best man were roommates at the dormitory, and they got in a fight, and Jan bit my roommate in the back to the point where he bled. So, and Jan was 6'3" and 260 pounds, and he was a smart guy. He was an articulate guy, but he was a mean son of a gun. And I remember, I think he might have gotten a fight with Putski too. And I think he hit Putski with a 40-pound dumbbell.
Ooch.
And that didn't wind up too well for Putski. I think and then I think Jan got fired. I can't remember if that was Oklahoma or where, or Texas. But he came back and he'd hurt his back, and he and his brother took over a bar. It was called the Viking Bar in Seven Corners, right down by campus. And Jan was a huge Rolling Stone fan, and he saw him in Minneapolis, and then he went down to see him, I think, in Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa, where they played. And I heard that he had overdosed and died the next day, and I was sick. And then his brother Scott, about 15 years later, got shot and killed at the bar. Oh. So it was horrible. But Jan was, and he was a tough kid too. I mean, he was tough, and he if he would have played, he walked off the football team, and he was looking at a starting position his sophomore year as a guard, but he hated the way that it was so demanding, and he was a big outdoorsman. He loved to fish and he loved to hunt. He couldn't do it, So he just quit.
Hmm.
He quit football, and then he started wrestling, and I knew right away that the wrestling wasn't going to be his line of, because his mentality was cut and dried. It was either right or wrong, and if it was wrong, he was going to fight. So, and it's just too bad. And I remember his wife had contacted a couple of the boys that knew him and went to school with him, and asked if there was a market, for his ring clothes. And I said, geez, I have no idea, But yeah, it was sad. There's been so many tragedies in wrestling. With especially the guys give it their all, and then at the end there's just nothing there, and a lot of that has to do with the WWE. They were making it's $1 billion corporation, and I don't know right now, but at the time when I was there, and I wrestled from 85 really until 93, I think, or part of 94. And there just wasn't anything there in terms of, any sort of something you could fall back on. There was, they didn't say, well, here's what you can do. You can do this. You can buy into this. You can have a retirement plan. You can have insurance policy. But their main premise was they wanted to keep you an independent contractor so they wouldn't have to take out any insurance on you. And you signed a contract that you were independent contractor. And it's funny because Brian and I sued Vince because in that contract there was a horrible monetary part of this contract that said that we were supposed to get 25% of the gross out of outside revenue. And when we found out, we only got 8% of the net. That's what he was giving everybody. And I remember when the dolls first came out, guys were getting checks for $92,000 and $85,000 for a quarter, because those damn, those action figures were just flying off the shelf, and I remember when we got them, we were, I think, third level. I remember we got a check for $10,000, and I thought, geez, this doesn't seem right. And then, sure enough, after we left the company, we decided that, we'd have a lawyer look into it, and he read our existing contract, the first one, and he said, oh God, he said, this amounts to indentured slavery. He says, it promises everything for the WWE, but it doesn't give you guys anything. So that's another reason why we're not in the Hall of Fame.
And I think, by the way, Ben James, that answers your question that you asked related to the action figures. So my next question, my old friend Oben Johnson. Oben is as tough as anybody, Jim, because he is currently battling cancer. And Oben is an old fan of yours from your Mid-Atlantic days. But besides your Mid-Atlantic stuff, he wanted to ask memories of working. Oh, you probably knew this question was coming. Your Herb Abrams story of the day. How was it working for Herb?
Well, Herb was a little out of control. He was a lot out of control.
I was going to say.
He had these huge ideas, and, he went to Vegas. He booked the MGM auditorium, and they only used half of it. And then I remember he had a number of ladies of the night waiting for him up in his suite. He had this big, beautiful suite, and he, God rest his soul, he had a little substance abuse. And he was just a character. He just wanted, he wanted to do things that, make a name for himself and splash this and splash that. And, he had a good idea, but, there was just no way that anybody could compete with Vince. Now this Impact, or not Impact, but this AIW, whatever, is the guy who owns the football team. he's a billionaire 5 times over, 10 times over. So he's got a lot of money, that he can afford to, seed his wrestling program. And I watch it occasionally. I don't watch any of the WWE because it's completely the same from show to show to show. And then, Vince lucked out with the Fox deal for $1 billion. And now I heard he's got one with NBC coming up. So, he will continue to, be the only, player as far as professional wrestling. But it's funny because this Gable Stevenson, that kid who just won the national championship from Minnesota, he's 6'3", 285 pounds, and just athletic as ever. And I think he was 19-0 this year. And I think his combined record over his 3 years at college is like 67-2. And he said that the WWE is going to be there for him, whenever he goes. I just hope that, he understands what he's getting into in terms of, the different personality he'll be working with. And, I know things have changed a lot since I've been there, but I watch the TV and everybody's a heel. Nobody's a baby face. You can't coward because that's a sign of weakness. And Vince has remained true to his own conception of what he wanted to promote as professional wrestling, and you can't knock it because he's been a huge success.
So as we begin winding down, Jim, I have, first of all, I want to say I believe you've answered the questions of Jeff Zinger and Bill Pancoast. Thank you, guys. I want to, lastly, our friend of the show, Benji Fido, and his son, Antonio, and they wanted to know how much of did Vern play in shaping your attitudes towards the wrestling business?
Oh, geez. Well, first of all, I know Antonio is a huge wrestling fan. God bless you, Antonio. I want you to stay well and play as hard as you can. Okay? But they're right. Vern had taught us, take pride in what you do. And pro wrestling is not a joke. To me, Vern taught us the right thing in terms of, going out there every night trying to put the best product we could do. And at the same time, you were actually, pro wrestling is an art form. And to me, that's the way I've always approached it. And I gave my best every night because that's what I was trained to do.
Gotcha. Well, as Jeff said, we are winding up. I have one last question, and it's one of those kind of gray area type of questions. But in your book, and again, the book, if you haven't gotten the book, I encourage you to seek this book out. Jim will have copies on April the 2nd, 7 p.m. when he does the Happy Hour Captain's Corner with our old friend Nick Massey. We will post a link in our Facebook group. I encourage you to join this, support our guests. But you want to get a copy of this book because it's almost a love letter to life in a sense that this is it's such a positive reflection. And this is the guy you are. As we're talking to you today, your book has really come to life for me in this. But you seem to have spent a lot of time in the beautiful city of Venice, Florida. And
yes,
I am born and bred in the state of Florida, and I am moving back after hellacious years of cold winter, though I'm sure your winters are 10 times worse. But I'm moving back at some point next year, and Venice is on my radar. I've spent a lot of time there. I've gone to Casperson Beach, collected shark's teeth with my kids, and I love the area. Do you still get down to Florida And the reason I'm asking also is we run fan fests in the Tampa area. These are very small fan fests where we limit to 200 guests. And we do it so that way fans can really interact with the legends. Do you still get down to Venice? And if so, can we possibly entice you to come to one of our shows?
Well, here's the deal. My wife and I have been going down to Venice for 47 years. And my father-in-law, who passed away a number of years ago, was in the car business, and he bought a lot of property down in Florida. And he lived in a condo right on Venice Beach. So we used to go there all the time. And my mother-in-law, Mary's mom, is 97 years old, and it lives in Cape Coral at a assisted living. So last year, because of this doggone pandemic, we had to cancel 2 different trips down there because we couldn't see her. They at the assisted living building wouldn't let anybody in. So we went down there the 8th of February this year, and actually we stayed in Naples, North Naples, and then we drove up, and then we always drove. We spent the day at Venice Beach, and it's just, I just love that beach. I love that city. It's a great city. And they have a place called the Crow's Nest, and it's right on the jetties there. And they have a formal dining upstairs where you can get great seafood, or they have a real nice little pub downstairs. And I used to meet Gene Okerlund, who lived 5 miles from Venice in Osprey. And every time we'd go down there, Mary and I, we'd get together with him. And he and Jeannie, we'd meet at the Crow's Nest and have a cocktail and a hamburger or whatever it was. So we went down and we spent the day down there. And I got to tell you, fellas, it was so cold in Minnesota this past winter. And the week that we were gone, it was 50 below in St. Paul and Minneapolis.
Wow.
And it was 87 degrees in Naples. It was just gorgeous. We had a great time, and my grandson had been picked. He was the only Minnesota 15-year-old player to get picked for an elite soccer tournament down in Naples. So we went down there and watched them play in four matches, and actually they lost the championship game, our match, 2-1, and it was just so fun to watch him compete because these kids were just incredible. Oh boy, they were good. And it was 80 degrees at night. Something we won't see here in Minnesota for until June. Maybe then.
So, well, Jim, listen, we certainly want to appreciate you going out of your way.
Absolutely.
And spending some time with us, and going a little bit over on the time that we had originally planned for you.
That's okay. It was my pleasure.
Wow, we really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you, Jim. Barry, how great was Jim Brunzell in that interview?
Jeff, I'm not kidding. My favorite guest of all time.
Yeah, he could not have been a nicer guy. And Barry, after we were finished recording with Jim, had said, we really hope we can get Jim to come back on with us again. And because, Barry said, I got like 50 questions for the guy, and he had to narrow them down to like 5. So we've got a ton of other stuff that we can get to with Jim. But he certainly was a really, really nice man. We really appreciate him coming on. So, Barry, now as we begin to wrap up this particular segment, 1 or 2 things I did want to mention. Barry, getting ready to go to Nashville at the time of this recording. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Going to try some hot chicken for the first time. And I will also be meeting for the first time, Barry, a brother shipper from the Nashville area. How about that?
Who's that going to be?
I'm not going to reveal any names just in case it falls through. Next episode, you'll find out who it is. I do want to mention also, Barry, our ongoing Funniest Movie Tournament. The day this show comes out, which is tomorrow, I can now announce to the public, Barry, round 2.
What?
Today. Yes, indeed. Now the matchups get tough. Barry, I got to tell you, the time we started recording, I noticed, unfortunately, Groundhog Day taking it on the chin from Christmas Vacation. A little surprising.
Yeah, a little surprising, and I like both, and I think you had referenced that that I do like both. I like both films tremendously. I'm a little surprised though. I think Groundhog Day maybe, I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I don't think we have enough of the people saying, if this movie does not win this poll, I have lost all faith in this group. I think I've read that about 7 times.
It's
now.
fixed.
Yeah, exactly.
The fix is in.
Yeah, I say exactly. Why aren't these movies seeded? Yeah, that's another thing I've heard too. But last thing, Barry, before we go, Barry, I know you're going to want to comment. We have a limited amount of time. I'm going to give you a chance to rant. Barry.
Yes.
Eric Bischoff, Hall of Famer.
Well, considering some of the other people that are in that Hall of Fame, that's fine.
Eric fucking Bischoff in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, it's going to.
Yeah, especially the WWE Hall of Fame, which is, that's the, it's crazy. It's wrestling, Jeff, at this point.
It is, only in wrestling can you, have an unlimited budget for a national corporation, overspend on that budget, lose the company. I will say, after he took them to where they were in the first place in the ratings and stuff like that. Applause to Uncle Eric. Congratulations for that. But again, with an unlimited budget, okay, then lose millions and millions of dollars and be considered a Hall of Famer. Yeah, folks, if that's what you want, that's what you get. And, just like Vince's limo driver, enjoy that Hall of Fame ring that you'll be getting. Can't wait to hear that speech. So on behalf of my co-host, Barry Rose, and the sweet man himself, our producer, Lou Kipilman, I will remind you, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren Barry, a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. More info when I get back from Nashville about our Patreon channel and our Patreon exclusive content that we will be offering to you sooner rather than later. Woo! Play the blues, Edge.